picking some ants out of my tea. You know, I get questions from people about living in Mexico. Maybe you're thinking about moving to Mexico, maybe you're not. But if you're watching this, you're thinking about it because you can see from the title the difference between living in Mexico, which is actually called the United Mexican States, and living in a American expatriate community. It's very, very different. And I think both have their advantages and disadvantages. I've lived in both, but I'm a really curious person. You know, I've lived in a lot of different places in the United States and several different places in Mexico. I've always been curious, even as a child, when they would tell you, you know, curiosity killed the cat. And I believed it, but I didn't think it was going to kill me. And so far it hasn't. Here's the big difference. If you speak no Spanish and you really feel you have no capacity to learn it or interest, then living in an American expatriate community in Mexico is going to serve you well, because it's exactly like living in a community, depending on where it is, in the United States. For instance, I live in Baja California, which is a state. There are 32 states in Mexico. And the federal district, which is the city of Mexico, which is similar to like Washington, D.C. And I live in Baja California, and that's one state, and there's also a state called Baja California Sur. And probably if you vacationed here, you've been to Sur, or maybe you've been to the mainland of Mexico, because Baja is like a little finger that broke off from the mainland, I don't know, 4 or 5 million, ask a scientist, a bunch of million years ago. And so we're really quite different. In fact, there were people from the mainland who basically always say, Baja California is not Mexico. It's just so American. There are a lot of Canadians here as well. So if you have that kind of situation where you don't really think you want to learn, you just want to live in Mexico, you want all the advantages of Mexico without actually having to learn the language or really interact with the residents of Mexico, then an expat community is perfect for you. The private communities particularly, and they start from really like 10 miles south of, on the west coast, south of San Diego, or San Ysidro is the name of the city where you cross into Tijuana. And about 7-8 miles from there, there is an expat community right there. So if you needed to be a person who had to cross almost every day, or wanted to, or needed to, that would be a good community to choose, because it's 6 miles from the border. Go back across the border. Then you go a little further and you get to Rosarito, which you may or may not know because it used to be a big spring break place. And there's huge numbers of Americans that live there. And there are a lot of private communities. I was not attracted to Rosarito. It really always felt like a tourist town to me. And I never could find the center of it. Where was the cultural center? Even though, in fact, they have a lovely and new, beautiful cultural and education center, which is the museum, and where they put on a lot of programs for free. That's another one of the many pluses of Mexico, is most of the culture is free here. If you go to a concert, I mean, if you're going to be, Taylor Swift, you're going to have to pay. But if you want to go to a concert, generally it's going to be free. The dance is going to be free. The theater, maybe it's going to cost you $5 to go. So if that's the sort of thing that interests you, and of course the food is lovely. After Rosarito, there's a strip called Medio, which means medium, Medio Camino, which is halfway actually between the city of Rosarito and Ensenada, and that is where, in Rosarito, twice a year, there's a huge bike race. You don't have to be a real bicycle person to do it. People wear costumes, and they ride from Rosarito to Ensenada. It's a long ride, and it's a hard ride when you have to go through the Valley de Guadalupe, which is the wine valley. But a lot of people do it, and I've seen kids do it, people who look older than I do, and who probably are older than I am, or in better shape anyway, because I never tried it. And after that, Medio Camino is a private community, which I happen to live in. It was one of the first communities I chose. I had previously come to Mexico, to Baja California, about 20 years ago, and that was a big mistake. I just was totally unprepared. I just thought, oh, I'll just go live in a house. I'll just rent a house or buy a house in Mexico and live there. Well, if you buy a house, when I went to Pennsylvania a few years ago and I was living there, my neighbors didn't run out to greet me. They didn't say, hey, Carol, it's good to see you. People take time to know you. So particularly, I think if you're a single person and a single woman, because what does she want? My husband? That's always a suspicion. I don't know why. Why do we want their husbands? Anyway, and then I lived there for a while, and actually then I bought a house further south. Now this is an interesting place. There's a little place just about 15 miles south of Ensenada called La Bufadora. And I actually didn't live there. I lived in a place called Punta Banda, but I say La Bufadora because if you want to look it up, that's the easiest and fastest way to find it, because there's like 4 different Punta Bandas. Look for the La Bufadora one. And they have a huge expatriate community down there, really sizable, and many different communities along there, all of which are expatriate communities. And also, if budgets are a big deal for you, and you're like, oh, I got to move to Mexico because, I have to make it on $1,000 a month, then you want to look in Punta Banda and Baja Cove, because the rents are still under $1,000 a month there. And in the La Jolla community, which is right near there, now remember, I'm doing this in 2023, but you can still pretty much find a decent place to live for under $700 a month. By decent, I mean it has good plumbing. It's in a nice community. And it's got a lot of Americans there. The thing about Punta Banda is they are very, very active. They have a theater there. They have a little library there. They're very active in involving you in the community. This is really good if you're a single man or woman and you just don't want to be isolated. But on the other hand, there are a certain number of people that move to places like La Bufadora because they want to be isolated. I chose, in the end, I don't want to leave out La Misión, which is near La Fonda. Look it up. What's La Fonda? La Fonda will tell you where. La Fonda is a restaurant that's been there since about the 1970s. It's pretty famous. I don't know. And La Misión has 2 sides to it. It has the beach side and it has the mountain side, the hillside. And I've actually lived in both. The beach side is paved. The houses are really, as they are in many beach places, right on top of each other. And I didn't love that. I like to have a little bit of a garden, a little bit of space. So I preferred the mountain. But in the end, and this is about 2 years that I did that, I was studying Spanish all along because I am curious and I wanted to be more involved. I wanted to know more. I want to be able to go to a play or a musical and understand it in Spanish. Now, I can't say that I do that perfectly or even medium, but I'm better at it. I mean, I like to think my Spanish is really getting very, very good. But the other day I went to Office Max down here. I had to make copies of something. And I thought, I'm really doing great. I'm speaking to the service person about making a copy, and I'm asking, cuánto copia a pizza. And next to me was another customer, and he turned and he said, I can help you. Having heard my Spanish, he right away leapt in and helped in English for me. Well, I'm glad he did that, but also I missed an opportunity to practice my Spanish. I also have to say that a lot of times when I and other people who are not Mexican start speaking Spanish, well, for me, the person, even if I know what I'm saying, it looks at me as if it's a dog speaking to them. It's like their dog started talking to them. I was like, what? My dog is speaking in Spanish? What? Because it's clear that I look like an American and suddenly I'm speaking in Spanish, and it's very unexpected, but also pretty bad Spanish, so that may be part of it. I do want to mention that on the mainland, there's places like Mazatlan, which is in the state of Sinaloa, and a lot of people like that. A lot of Americans go there. There's also Lake Chapala and San Miguel Allende. So if that's what you prefer, you don't really want to deal with having to learn Spanish, and you also want people that speak English a lot. I will tell you, Up in the La Misión and Rosarito, practically everybody speaks Spanish. You go to a store, you don't have to ask in Spanish for something. They speak English. If you go to a restaurant, the menus are in English. I just wanted more of a challenge. I needed more of a challenge. I'm getting old. I am old. I'm not kidding. I am old. I'll be 83 next month. I needed my brain to work more. So I wanted that challenge. Now, for me, I now live in Ensenada again. I've lived here off and on for 2 years. When COVID came along, I moved back down to Punta Banda where there were fewer people. But, it's not done with, and I do wear masks when I go shopping. So I'm in a little private community, which is mixed, actually. It's a mix of Mexicans and Americans. And the Mexicans have been here like 40 years. I mean, their houses have been here. They often don't live here all the time. They either live in another part, like a hotter part of Mexico, like Mexicali, or they are Mexican Americans who live in a tremendous number of them come from Arizona, and they come for the summer. I like it. The other thing is that neighbors talk to you. They talk to you even though we have a garden between us, because I don't really know why. I thought I had a perfect explanation for you. I don't know why. But it's because we're not foreigners to each other. When I moved into a Mexican community, my neighbors did speak to me. They said hello, but they didn't say come on over. And I don't blame them, because when I moved to a small community in Pennsylvania, nobody said, hey, come on over. People like to take their time to get to know somebody who's living next door to them. That didn't happen here. My neighbor right away said, hi, how are you? And she's actually from Argentina, and she's lived here for 30 years. So that was really great for me. So that's my, and also the prices are different wherever you go. So you want to look at your budget. A lot of this information is really online. Some of it's in Facebook, but right now you can just pull it up, You do have to, if you want to buy a house, you've got to get yourself a visa. If you don't want to buy a house, then you can just get a tourist visa and stay until, until somebody asks you to please get a temporary visa or a permanent visa. I've been here a long time, so I have a permanent visa. Anyway, I thought I would share that with you. Usually I don't talk about this kind of thing so much, but I thought I would share with you what it's like, the major differences, because you can just visit those communities. Each one has a different personality. Some are a little snooty, quite frankly, like, hey, only rich people live there. You can't get in the door. If you want to buy there for less than $300,000 today, could be $400 next year. And also the rents run $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 a month. Whereas in Punta Banda, you're not going to, you really have to look hard to find something that costs $1,400 a month. And it's going to be right on the beach, and it's going to be quite large. So the further away you get from the city, usually, it is the less expensive in terms of your rents. Food, people say it's very cheap here, but I don't know that it's always so cheap here. I just spent like $2 on 5 bananas the other day, and I went, what? What? Why aren't you paying attention? So you do have to, look before you purchase, if that matters to you. Or if you're buying for a lot of people, the truth is I can afford to spend $2 on 4 or 5 bananas. I just didn't like that. I mean, after all, this is not Beverly Hills. It's the United Mexican States.